KTM ready to crash. This could be the Austrian brand's new slogan after facing issues that might lead to bankruptcy. Hey everyone, welcome to the new video and welcome to the channel. As you can see, I'm decked out in KTM gear today to discuss their recent struggles. In this video, we'll cover KTM's problems and the company restructuring they're facing. We'll see if they'll go bankrupt or crash and burn. We'll talk about where the issue lies, what's next for MotoGP, how they plan to fix this mess, and how KTM's situation might affect users like us who own KTMs or want to buy one. But first, let's start with a quick history of KTM. KTM was founded in 1934 in Mattighofen, Austria by Hans Trunkenpolz. It all began as a car repair shop called Kraftfahrzeug Trunkenpoth Mattighofen. In 1953, they partnered with Ernst Kronreif, becoming Kronreif and Trockenpoth Mattighofen, KTM, and made their first bike, the R1. This bike was nothing like the KTMs we know or picture today. The Austrian brand grew, focusing on enduro, motocross and sports bikes. They faced a crisis in the 90s, leading to restructuring and the birth of KTM AG. From 1990, KTM started becoming the brand we all recognize today. For context, let's look at KTM's global position in the motorcycle industry. KTM is Europe's largest bike maker, dominating the off-road and racing segments. Now, for context, as we've discussed, KTM faced a crisis but recovered when Pierre Mobility bought the company. Currently, Pierre Mobility owns about 51% of KTM and also owns Gas and Husqvarna, among others. I believe 80 to 90% of Pierre Mobility's revenue comes from KTM. The remaining stake, about 48%, is owned by Bajaj Auto. Bajaj is an Indian giant that helps produce bikes for emerging markets. Now let's discuss what led KTM to its current crisis. In the 90s, Pierre Mobility bought KTM, restructured it, and grew it to where it is today. But due to the COVID situation in 2020, I believe that's when a lot of poor decisions were made. KTM has been accumulating an ever-growing debt since 2022, when it owed about 300 million euros. This figure ballooned to a staggering 1,400 or 1,500 million euros by 2024. That's where their main problem stems from. It all started, as I mentioned, in 2020 with lockdowns, COVID, and supply shortages. As you may recall, the pandemic caused severe supply shortages, disrupted production chains, and created high demand for unavailable products. KTM then decided to differentiate itself by ramping up production despite the supply shortages. Production to compensate when we'd exit the crisis, to have bikes to sell while competitors wouldn't. If you recall, back then, people ordering bikes had to wait up to 9 months for delivery. So KTM's goal was to have your bike ready when you came to get it. This led to aggressive investment in manufacturing 100,000 bikes unsold in 2024, resulting in a 1.4 billion euro debt. When it ended, demand wasn't as high as expected. They made the bikes but were left with debt mainly to suppliers. It's worth noting that Austria is in recession, which may worsen their situation. Additionally, as you know, competition costs are extremely high. KTM invests heavily in developing bikes for competitions. I'm not just talking bikes, but competition in general. The issue they face in MotoGP is they can't simply say, alright, we've got a huge debt, let's quit racing for a season or two to cut that massive cost of competing. The problem is, in MotoGP, they can't leave due to a contract, I think, for 2 more years until 2027. The deal's with Dorna, and if they break it, they'd have to pay way more than they're spending now. If they say, let's stay in MotoGP but not develop the bikes, just maintain what we have for 2 years until we can exit. The upside, as KTM says, is that the racing program isn't solely funded by KTM. They have a Red Bull is a partner, not a sponsor, which means that the competition expenses are somewhat shared, so to speak. And another possible mistake is that in recent years or seasons, they've acquired brands like Gas and Husqvarna, and they've had too rapid growth without considering the risks involved. From what I've heard, I'm speaking a bit casually here, KTM also bought off-road brands and then removed them from the market. They bought brands, I can't recall which ones now, to eliminate competition by taking them off the market. So that's one aspect, guys. Next, what measures will KTM take to address this crisis? Well, KTM has started a company restructuring process to renegotiate its debt. Without going into details, since we're not experts, it's basically that, let's say KTM has a debt of 1 million euros. Now that million isn't owed to just one entity. They owe that million euros first to the government, part of it to their employees, and part to their suppliers. So it would work like this. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. The first to get paid would be the government, then the workers, and lastly the suppliers. So legally, or however it works, they need to show a viable strategy to handle expenses. KTM basically says, we're out of money, we're broke, we're in. I'm bankrupt and can't make payments, but I could manage 30% of what I owe. So if I owe 1.5 billion, I could pay 500 million. How would that be paid? First, we'd pay the state, then workers, and lastly 30% to suppliers. Now here's another point about the suppliers. They must agree and say, okay, this seems viable. We believe you'll pay that 30%, and we accept these terms so KTM doesn't go under. You might ask, why would I, as a supplier, let you not repay fully? Well, there are two things to consider. As a supplier, it's either no payment at all or at least 30%. So suppliers will say, well, I'd rather get 30% than nothing at all. And that's basically how this works, okay? If I've made any mistakes, please correct me in the comments. They're planning staff reductions, but they're only cutting 600 jobs, which shows that KTM doesn't want to dismantle its workforce, but rather try to resolve this situation in the most optimal way possible, causing the least harm. Obviously, the workers probably aren't thrilled about this, but cuts have to come from somewhere. Another solution KTM wants to implement to address this crisis is to reduce motorcycle production from 112,000 units to 76,000 units. Why? To control their inventory. This has consequences we'll discuss later, where we'll see if it affects us. As for MotoGP, well, KTM isn't leaving MotoGP in the short term, at least that's what they've said. As I mentioned earlier, it'd be costlier to leave MotoGP now than to stay at a balanced level, let's say, not developing bikes and just racing for the sake of it. I believe, as far as I know, riders have a clause in their contracts that says, well, if my team won't give me a competitive bike and I can't win with it, I can terminate the contract somehow. So I think KTM also wants riders to tighten their belts and take a pay cut. I'm not sure how this will play out. From what I've read, riders say they'll hear proposals, but they're not too happy about it, obviously. If this is due to poor company management, they shouldn't have to pay the price, clearly. Let's see how this crisis affects end users, right? Does it impact us negatively or positively? We'll have to see. Regarding negative impacts, we'll likely see fewer models available. With a reduced range from KTM, GasGas and Husqvarna, with higher demand and lower supply, prices are bound to increase. This means motorcycle prices may rise due to less product availability, also helping offset the company's losses. After-sales support, including spare parts and customer service, could also be affected, right? Because, in the end, think about the company's workforce. If you're in a company that seems to be going downhill, you won't work as happily, you won't be as motivated, activated, and you're probably thinking they might let me go tomorrow. So that part of the business, or the part that affects us all personally, will likely be impacted. As for potential benefits, well, it's all a bit subjective, isn't it? It could be a case of quality over quantity. We make fewer bikes, but we can inspect them better for higher quality. Many people have complained about KTM's quality, especially regarding electronics. This could be a key moment to start improving and better reviewing the issues with KTMs. On the other hand, depending on how the restructuring unfolds, because Stefan Pierre has essentially said that all this restructuring effort is to avoid losing his 51% stake in the company. In other words, he doesn't want to give up control. And I think it's much better this way than for control to be taken by Indians and the brands start using cheaper tech components from India and so on. We'll see what unfolds with this whole situation. KTM faces its biggest challenge in history. It's incredible how an industry giant can stumble and fall like this. Let's see how this plays out. Personally, I hope KTM doesn't end up in Chinese hands and keeps its European essence. On the flip side, I might cozy up to Triumph. Who knows, I might have to go British and join the Brexit crowd. Or maybe I'll switch to Ducati. Who knows? They're tech. They're Italian spirit. So guys, drop your thoughts about this video in the comments. What's your take on KTM? What'll happen to this brand I've loved since childhood? I'd hate to see it vanish or become just another European Chinese brand. Remember, on December 21st we have Amatera's Papa Noel event. Everything's all set. We're moving forward with all of this year's sponsors, and there are many. The upcoming raffles will be truly impressive. So I'll see you all on December 21st at Prubia's Chicken Coop, where we'll collect food and try to donate over 520 kilos, surpassing last year's donation. I'm also finishing up work on my newsletter. There'll be a newsletter on the Desenlatado channel. I'll gift you a chapter from my book, The Art of Motorcycling. It's a riding techniques book where I include everything I've learned over the years in driving courses, with techniques, useful tips and personal experiences to help you improve your riding skills. It's especially helpful if you're just starting out. This book will be really beneficial for you. Every week, I'll share motorcycle news and updates through the newsletter. I'll notify you about my new videos. Why? Because YouTube doesn't alert channel followers about new videos anymore. So the only way to stay updated is through the newsletter and my social media. Without further ado, I'll wrap up the video here. As always, if you enjoyed it, please share, like and subscribe if you haven't already. Check out my social media links below, and I'll see you in the next video.